spider cake, does whatever a spider cake can. It's October, which means Halloween is right around the corner. For today's baking adventure, I really wanted to pick a recipe that kind of set the mood for the season. And as I was perusing the internet for interesting recipes, I came across a reference to something called a spider cake, and I just thought that would be the perfect creepy recipe for today's video. Halloween is one of my favorite holidays, and since we aren't likely to be doing anything out this year, it's really a great opportunity for us to try out some Halloween baking. Aside from the name, the recipe isn't very scary. There aren't any actual spiders in the dish. Apparently, the name refers to the vessel it was historically cooked in. Spider was the term for a three-legged cast iron cooking pan that was used to cook over a hearth in the olden days. Once the kitchen stove was introduced in the 19th century, people began making cast iron pans without the legs, and I guess eventually the name spider fell out of use. But for our purposes, a regular cast iron skillet and a modern oven should do just fine in place of a spider and a hearth. So if there aren't any real spiders involved, what actually is a spider cake? Well, technically, a spider cake is any cake that you baked in your cast iron pan, so an upside down cake, for example. But the recipe that caught my eye was a recipe for spider corn cake in Mrs. Lincoln's Boston Cookbook, What to Do and What Not to Do in Cooking, which was published in 1884. And no, it's not that Mrs. Lincoln. This Mrs. Lincoln was a cooking instructor and eventually principal at the Boston Cooking School in the late 1800s. She was really passionate about teaching people of all backgrounds about cooking. While she was principal at the Boston Cooking School, she actually implemented a number of special programs, including free cooking courses for immigrant girls in Boston's North End, courses on nutrition for medical students at Harvard, and instruction in sick room cookery for local nurses. Her recipe for spider cake seems to be a variation on cornbread baked in a cast iron skillet. But what interested me the most is that just before baking, after the batter has been added to the baking vessel, you pour milk directly on top of the batter. It's supposed to create a rich, custardy effect, which sounds fascinating. I know my dad eats his cornbread by dunking it in a glass of milk, so maybe it's kind of like that? A more recent version of this recipe was published in the New York Times in the mid-2000s by Jonathan Reynolds. It was called New England Spider Cake, perhaps referring to Mrs. Lincoln's Boston Cookbook. His recipe is actually very similar to Mrs. Lincoln's recipe. It uses most of the same ingredients, but it seems that he has modernized the recipe a bit by upping the amount of sugar, quite significantly actually, from a single tablespoon to 3/4 of a cup. He also replaced some of the milk with heavy cream, I guess to make it richer. So I waffled back and forth for a while about which recipe I wanted to try, the more historic recipe, or the recipe with extra cream and sugar. In the end, I decided that I wanted to taste the original recipe, as the people back then would have enjoyed it. I can always make my own adaptations later. So first let's measure out 3/4 of a cup of cornmeal, and today I'm just using old-fashioned stone-ground yellow cornmeal. So we've got our 3/4 cups of cornmeal. We're going to add 1 cup of flour, 1 tablespoon of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, and half a teaspoon of soda, or baking soda as we know it. So I'm just going to whisk that together to make sure it's all well mixed. To make half a cup of sour milk, I'm just going to take half a cup of regular whole milk, sweet milk if you will, and then add roughly a half a tablespoon of lemon juice. Whisk this together a bit and let it sit for 5 minutes. And it's going to start to curdle and look pretty gross. Now that the sour milk has been sitting for about 5 minutes, so we can move on to mixing the wet ingredients together. 1 egg, whisked. And then half the amount of the total amount of sweet milk. So we're going to take half a cup of our sweet milk and add it to our eggs. So then we're going to add our half a cup of sour milk. Just whisk it together. Now we're just going to stir this into our dry ingredients. I'm going to slowly whisk in the wet ingredients. And that's it. That's our batter. That was really easy. I really hope this one is delicious because it's really easy to make. So I should mention that while I've been mixing up this batter, my cast iron pan has actually been in the oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, getting up to temperature. Now that it's hot, we can melt our butter, pour our batter into the pan, spread it out, and then pour the last half cup of sweet milk on top of the batter. Spider cake, does whatever a spider cake can. Smells good. Smells like cornbread. It's got this kind of strange pattern from where I poured the milk on, which I think is what's supposed to happen. Looks like cornbread with some shiny parts on it. I think we just give it a try. All right. Now, how do I get these out? All right. All right, let's give this a taste. So it tastes like cornbread, but not quite as crumbly as cornbread. More bready, I guess. I guess that's the extra flour. Just a hint of sweetness, which is really nice. It kind of gives an extra pop of the cornbread flavor. I think it might be really good with some butter, so let's try some of that. This would go really good with some jam or some honey. Ooh, honey. That sounds good. So I wanted to try some of the little shiny areas where the milk kind of caramelized. Let's see what that tastes like. So that's kind of where the hint of sweetness is coming from, I think. It's the milk that we poured on top has kind of caramelized and browned, and that part has left kind of the sweetness. It's a good lunch. It's a good side dish for Thanksgiving maybe, or for a backyard barbecue sometime. It's nice and rustic, which I think if you're cooking something in a cast iron pan, it's supposed to be rustic. So I'm really happy with how it looks. I'm really happy with how it tastes. I think I would try this recipe again. I actually don't think the butter is necessary. When I first imagined what this spider cake might taste like, I imagined something like a sweeter, custardier version of cornbread. But that wasn't quite right. It was actually pretty similar to cornbread, but maybe a bit more rustic. It was less crumbly, and I guess you could say it was a little bit more on the bready side. And I think that makes the spider cake a bit more neutral, but not in a bad way. It's actually really nice. I don't think I ever would have thought to put fruit jam on a slice of cornbread, but I would definitely put some on this spider cake. And that's wonderful because there are so many options for how to serve it. Maybe with jam, maybe with honey, and maybe with a little bit of whipped cream. It's just a flexible dish. All in all, I think I would recommend trying this recipe because it was really easy to make, it was fun to try something new, and I think you could serve it with a lot of different dishes. So what have you been making lately? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed baking this spider cake with me, let me know by liking and subscribing. And I'll see you next time. To counteract the cornbread-ness would be really nice.